Hi, and welcome to week 2 of our class, Curriculum Design and Assessment. Today we'll be going over historical views of curriculum in the United States. So during the colonial times, each region had their own kind of idea of what school was like. So in the New England colonies, which were founded by the Puritans, they valued education because if you couldn't read the Bible, then you wouldn't be able to interpret it yourself. So the Puritans really wanted everybody to be able to read. And started also the Latin schools, because if you wanted to go to college, you had to be able to speak Latin. The middle colonies were more parochial, and they had independent schools within their town. They would decide what the school was going to teach. And in the southern colonies, the education was mainly left to the family, usually provided by tutors that would come into the family. The curriculum was traditional, stressing basic skills, timeless and absolute values, social and religious conformity, faith and authority, and knowledge for the sake of knowledge. A lot of rote learning and memorization. It really was highly developed in each region. So during the national period, this is when we became a country, and we decided that we had to make school look different than it looked in European countries. So leaders began to link free public schooling to the idea of sustaining the democracy. If kids, same kind of thing like the Puritans, if kids couldn't read, or if students couldn't read, then they couldn't help with democracy and help make laws and help sustain the government. So it was important that our population was educated. There was an emphasis still on the classic, but not as much as before. There were free elementary schools, and mainly at this period, people only went to about 6th grade, maybe 8th grade. If you were from a rich family, you would go on to a secondary school or a Latin school, but most of the population only went to elementary school. This is when Noah Webster decided that the Americans needed their own language to be kind of separated from the British, and so that's why we have a lot of different spellings of words. Like in England, you would spell color with a U, and in America we don't do that. Lots of different spelling of words from the British language. And the McGuffrey developed these readers that were sent out to children. They were kind of graded, developed for each grade, which started that grading system, which began in about 1840. And they would talk about sections of American literature, like with George Washington, Patrick Henry, Benjamin Franklin. They taught several generations of Americans how to read, and in some conservative communities, they're still used. So we had a lot of educators that helped influence the American system. Johann Pestalozzi, I hope I'm saying that right, believed that education should not just be rote memorization, but child's natural development. That teachers should be available and positive. And this is kind of a new idea, because it was more of you sat down and you memorized things, and you were sat in rows and did exactly what the teacher said. And Johann had a kind of a different idea on that education should follow how a child developed. Friedrich Frober was the guy that developed kindergarten, that believed that very small children, 3 and 4-year-olds, should start school. It should be around play. It should be around group interest, but still maintaining that they needed an education at that time. Or before, lots of times school didn't even start until they were 6 years old. Johann Herbert said that students should develop a moral character and started the idea of what teachers should do in a classroom. So he said that teachers should have, before their lessons, preparation. They should develop the presentation of their lesson. They should associate new learning with old learning, have a system for what they wanted kids to do, and then an application for the lesson. Not too different than how we prepare lessons now, but the first guy to kind of put that in writing. And then Hubert Spencer believed that we should advance the human survival. He said that children should be taught how to think, not what to think. So that idea of teaching them to be critical learners. So starting in 1820 to about the 19th century, 1900s, the first kind of school that came around was a monitorial school. And this is where teachers taught high achieving students, and then those students taught others. It was very economical because you could have a teacher for a large group, mass education, but kind of went out of favor pretty quickly, because if the other student wasn't a good teacher, then it didn't really work for the younger kids. Common schools were seen as schools as the equalizing force. And I think we still have this idea that if you get an education that equalizes you in society in America, kind of a new concept because that's not believed in, or at least it wasn't believed in Europe at that time, and a focus on the basic skills. And then about 1850, we started elementary schools. They added, instead of just reading, writing, arithmetic, they added in sciences and physical education, history, music, and art. Basically the well-rounded elementary schools we have now. And then either secondary schools or high schools started about 1900s. Very few kids started in secondary school. So about in 1900, only about 11% of the population went to high school. And by 1930, only 50% of people went to high school or secondary schools, went on for that education, which you think, gosh, that's not that long ago. In 1970, about 94% of every student went to high school and only 77% of them graduated. So when we think back on how schools were, they weren't educating everyone. And that's a consideration we need to think about. During the transitional period, there were several committees, and you may have already heard of the Committee of 15 or the Committee of 10, and these were the people put together, mostly men, that standardized the curriculum for 20th century. The committees were dominated by subject matter specialists, and they had a profound faith in what they wanted to teach. The Committee of 15 stressed the 3 R's: English, grammar, literature, history. They also thought that hygiene should be taught, culture, drawing and music should be taught, once or twice a week. And the Committee of 10 structured the secondary education to say that they needed 4 years of reading and 4 years of math, and they needed put the sciences in order of how they were taught. Their recommendations were reflected in the Carnegie Unit, a method for evaluating credits for college admission, and that method is still used in most high schools even today. So just a little shout out to vocational school. It wasn't even started until 1917. By 2 years, 2 years after that act was involved, enrollment doubled in these programs and was seen as a great way for kids to get skills that they needed to support themselves. A kind of a decline in the 2000s because of the high stakes testing. It was seen that every child could go to college, every student should succeed. Not every kid is going to go to college. Not every child is going to go to college, and so vocational education is still important. After the 2000s, the career and technical education gained more popularity. There's a lot more money attached to that now, and lots of high schools have academic and career tech tracks for kids. I know that my last child attended a high school in which she could get her EMT certificate and then work immediately as an EMT out of high school while she went to college, and it was a great program and valuable to lots of kids that want to try something different. So curriculum has a huge field in how it's developed and what's come from. Bobbitt and Character said the curriculum outline should have each subject and then develop activities, and lessons should have objectives, learning experience, activities, practice, and evaluation. Nothing new. This is the same thing that we've been telling people to do for a long time. This was developed in the 1920s. And even last year, there was still a fight in my district that teachers didn't want to post their objectives. Like, this is not new stuff, guys. This is something we should be doing, telling kids what they're going to learn. Kilpatrick said the curriculum should be organized around classroom and social activities, so making sure that kids had time to talk, that there was group experiences, that they had group projects that they were doing. His book, The Foundations of Methods, allowed for students' input to see what they wanted to learn. And whereas the Committee of 10 saw school as a place where students go to get knowledge, he saw it as a school as a community where students practice cooperation and self-government. So in 1984, a book called A Place Called School by Goodluck came out, and he found that there were things that we were doing that maybe we should change. He said that the classrooms generally organized as a group that the teacher treats as a whole, so whole group instruction. The emphasis on classroom control and order. Teachers check enthusiasm and excitement. that overall the tone of education is flat and neutral. A lot of passive listening, a lot of kids taking tests but rarely interacting to learn from each other. A little use of media, guest speakers or field trips, and instruction rarely goes beyond the acquisition of little effort to motivate kids to solve and to think critically. And so it was kind of a call to action in the United States that we needed to change education. And there's kind of two competing things in the United States. Where there's high stakes testing where we're really pushing kids to do the best that they can do, and there's nothing wrong with that. But when that's the only focus, it gets in the way of what students need and what are the other soft skills that they need to develop to become good citizens and adults in our society. As you know, we have many balls in the air right now. We've got a student need versus what businesses need, political agendas right now, focus on what's relevant for the future, community requirements, from your board or your principal, and the teacher's own personality and teaching philosophy affects what we do in the classroom. So we've got to balance all these balls to make sure that we're doing what we need to do for kids. I know that you're really working right now, most of you virtually. If you're lucky to have kids in front of you, you are very lucky. But that even is a consideration. What happens when there's a national emergency, either a fire or a pandemic? How does that change the needs of what we do for our kids? And so kind of put that in your brain as we start developing some of our curriculum. So for this week, in the discussion board, you're going to find, in addition to reading chapters 3 and 4 in your book, you're going to choose a scholarly article, and hopefully it's in the last 5 years, and do an analysis, a brief literature analysis, and share that in the discussion board. Make sure that's done by Thursday, and then you're going to respond to at least 2 people by Sunday. You also have a historical psychological foundations graphic organizer. You can find that in Blackboard. You're just going to download that Word document. You're going to fill it in from your reading. So I suggest you do that first because that will help you with your discussion board. And just as a side note, I know how hard everybody's working right now. Please practice some self-care. Use prayer or meditation to kind of help yourself get a little bit calmer because there's a lot going on. Make sure you get enough sleep and try to get some exercise in. Many of you are parents and teachers and working full time, and I know that this is another thing that you're adding to your plate, but good for you for taking this on, and I hope you have a great week.